10, only the BBC in England, and they would play it. We would know when they'd play it. It would be like 9-4.
Ringo Starr, the legendary drummer of the Beatles, has always been the one to keep a brave face through the band's most turbulent times. But beneath the surface, the pressures of fame and the intense dynamics within the group took a toll on him, leading to heartbreaking moments that even the most die-hard fans might not know. What truly happened behind the scenes of the world's most famous band is a story few have heard. But before we get into the revelations, we need to understand the early events that shaped Ringo Starr. Richard Starkey, better known to the world as Ringo Starr, was born on July 7, 1940, in a modest home at 9 Madron Street in Dingle, Liverpool, the son of confectioners Richard Starkey and Elsie Glee. Ringo was an only child, a fact that shaped much of his early years. His mother Elsie had a deep love for singing and dancing, a passion she shared with her husband before Ringo was born. The couple was often found in local ballrooms, dancing the night away to the swing music they adored. But once Richie, as they called him, entered their lives, the dancing nights came to an abrupt halt. Elsie, perhaps driven by a protective instinct, devoted herself entirely to her son, a devotion that sometimes bordered on obsession. In contrast, Big Richie, as Starkey's father was known, began to drift away from the family. The allure of the pub and the dance halls proved too strong, and he spent more and more time away from home, often disappearing for days on end. This growing distance between father and son would leave a lasting impact on young Ringo. By 1944, the Starkey family had to make another move, this time to Admiral Grove, another neighborhood in Dingle. Not long after the move, Ringo's parents separated, and by the end of the year, they were divorced. The breakup was a turning point for the young boy. He later admitted that he had no real memories of his father, who visited only a handful of times afterward. The separation left Elsie to fend for herself and her son on meager support payments from her ex-husband. It was a tough time, but Elsie was tougher. She took on various cleaning jobs and eventually found more stable work as a barmaid, a job she held for 12 years. Ringo's early life was marked by hardship and illness. At the tender age of 6, he developed appendicitis. What should have been a routine procedure to remove his appendix turned into a nightmare when he contracted peritonitis, a serious infection of the abdominal lining. The infection was so severe that Ringo slipped into a coma, hovering between life and death for days. When he finally awoke, he faced a long and grueling recovery that kept him away from his family for nearly a year. During this time, he was confined to Liverpool's Myrtle Street Children's Hospital, an experience that further isolated him from the world. By the time Ringo was discharged in 1948, he was already falling behind in school. At 8 years old, he was illiterate and struggled with basic mathematics. This lack of education made him feel alienated from his peers, leading to frequent truancy. Instead of attending school, Ringo often found solace wandering Sefton Park, far away from the academic pressures he couldn't meet. It wasn't until years later, with the help of a neighbor named Marie Maguire Crawford, that Ringo began to catch up with his education. But just as things seemed to be improving, fate dealt him another cruel blow. In 1953, Ringo contracted tuberculosis, a disease that would confine him to a sanatorium for 2 long years. It was during this period of isolation that Ringo's life took an unexpected turn. The medical staff at the sanatorium, keen on keeping their young patients occupied, encouraged them to join the hospital band. For the first time, Ringo was introduced to percussion. He was handed a makeshift mallet and began striking the cabinets next to his bed, making music from whatever he could find. This simple act sparked a passion within him that would change his life forever. Music became his refuge and drumming his purpose. He later recalled receiving a record called Bedtime for Drums as a gift during his convalescence, a moment he described as the beginning of his lifelong love for the drums. Returning home after his battle with tuberculosis, Ringo found himself disconnected from the conventional path of education and career. His prolonged hospital stays had left him far behind his peers both academically and socially. He tried to reintegrate, attending St. Silas, a Church of England primary school, where his classmates nicknamed him Lazarus due to his miraculous recovery. But by the time he reached secondary school, Ringo's interest in formal education had all but vanished. Instead, he turned to art, drama, and anything that allowed him to express himself creatively. Life at home, however, had taken a turn for the better. In 1954, Ringo's mother married Harry Graves, a man who would play a pivotal role in Ringo's development. Unlike Ringo's biological father, Harry was present, supportive, and shared a deep love for music. He introduced Ringo to the sounds of big band music, including the smooth vocals of Dinah Shore and Sarah Vaughan. The bond between Ringo and his stepfather grew strong, with Ringo later attributing much of his gentleness and kindness to Harry's influence. Despite this newfound stability at home, Ringo's attempts to find his place in the world of work were less successful. After recovering from tuberculosis, Ringo returned home with little motivation or direction. His first foray into employment was brief and uninspiring. A job with British Rail, which came with the promise of a warm suit, ended quickly when Ringo failed the physical examination. He found another job as a waiter on a dayboat, but his fear of being conscripted into the military led him to quit. It wasn't until 1956 that Ringo found a job that would unknowingly set the stage for his future. His stepfather Harry helped him secure an apprenticeship as a machinist at Henry Hunt & Son, a company that manufactured school equipment. It was here that Ringo met Roy Trafford, a fellow music enthusiast who introduced him to the world of skiffle, a genre that combined jazz, blues, and folk influences. The two would spend their lunch breaks in the factory's cellar, experimenting with makeshift instruments and dreaming of making music their life. This newfound passion for skiffle led Ringo to join forces with another musician, Eddie Miles. Together with Trafford, they formed the Eddie Miles Band, later renamed Eddie Clayton and the Clayton Squares. The trio began performing popular skiffle tunes, with Ringo using a washboard and thimble to create the rhythms that would later define his drumming style. On Christmas Day 1957, Ringo received a second-hand drum kit from Harry Graves. Though it was far from perfect, it was all Ringo needed to take his music to the next level. The Eddie Clayton Band began to gain local popularity, but by 1959, the skiffle craze was waning, giving way to the rise of rock and roll. Ringo was ready for the change. In November of that year, he joined Al Caldwell's Texans, a group that would soon transform into Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. It was around this time that Ringo adopted his now famous stage name, a combination of his love for rings and a nod to the country and Western music that had influenced him. As Ringo's journey with the Hurricanes began, so too did his path toward the Beatles, a journey that would soon take him to Hamburg, Germany. Ringo Starr's journey with the Beatles began in August 1962, a turning point in his life that would forever change the course of music history. When John Lennon invited him to join the band, Starr took a leap of faith, leaving behind Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. But the transition wasn't smooth. After he replaced Pete Best, the backlash was immediate. Fans of Best protested, chanting "Pete forever, Ringo never" at the Cavern Club. Even George Harrison wasn't spared, receiving a black eye from a disgruntled fan. Despite the initial turmoil, Starr's first recording session with the band on September 4, 1962, solidified his place, though not without a few bumps. Producer George Martin, unsure of Starr's drumming, brought in a session drummer for the recording of Love Me Do, leaving Starr to play tambourine and maracas. It was a rocky start, but Starr's resilient spirit soon won over both the band and the fans. By November of that same year, Starr had found his rhythm. Beatles fans, once skeptical, were now clamoring for him to sing, and his mailbag was as full as those of Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. The Beatles were on the brink of something monumental, and Starr was right there with them. As the band's popularity surged in Britain with hits like Please Please Me, the phenomenon known as Beatlemania was born. Starr's unique style and charismatic presence made him a fan favorite, especially in the United States, where the Beatles performed on The Ed Sullivan Show in February 1964, capturing the hearts of millions. Starr's charm extended beyond the drum kit. In the Beatles' first film, A Hard Day's Night, his deadpan humor and natural screen presence earned him critical acclaim, with some even considering his performance the highlight of the film. His personality shone through not just in music, but also in his interactions with fans and the media, becoming a symbol of the everyman who made it big. By 1965, Starr was not just a drummer, but a full-fledged celebrity, with fan clubs, merchandise, and even songs inspired by him, such as Cher's Ringo, I Love You. As the Beatles transitioned from live performances to studio recordings, Starr's role evolved. He provided the steady backbone to groundbreaking albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Revolver. But the pressures of fame and the band's creative direction began to take a toll during the recording of the White Album. In 1968, tensions within the band reached a boiling point, leading Starr to temporarily quit. He spent time in Sardinia, where a conversation about octopuses inspired him to write Octopus's Garden, a song that would later appear on Abbey Road. When he returned to the studio, Harrison had filled the room with flowers as a welcome back gesture, a touching moment in a time of growing discord. The Beatles' final years were marked by increasing strain, both creatively and personally. Despite the tensions, Starr remained a steady presence, contributing his talents to what would be their last studio effort, Let It Be. But by 1970, the band had officially disbanded, and Starr was left to navigate his own path in the post-Beatles world. Ringo Starr's life took a dark turn after the Beatles disbanded. The end of the band left him feeling utterly lost, and as his solo career wavered, he found himself spiraling into a serious drinking problem. What began as a way to cope with the pressures of fame soon became an uncontrollable addiction. Ringo described this period as one of increasing blackouts, where he often had no memory of his actions. He later recalled, "I've got photographs of me playing all over the world, but I have absolutely no memory of it." It was a time of deep confusion, where the line between reality and the haze of alcohol blurred almost beyond recognition. The impact of his addiction was severe, not just on his career, but on his personal life as well. Ringo's second wife, Barbara Bach, whom he married in 1981, also fell into the trap of addiction, influenced by the chaotic lifestyle they led together. The couple would retreat to rented villas, stock up on alcohol, and lose themselves in their addictions, hiding away from the world. This destructive pattern reached a terrifying climax in 1988, when Ringo awoke one Friday afternoon to find that he had trashed their house so badly that the staff thought burglars had broken in. Even worse, he had attacked Barbara so violently that they feared she was dead. This frightening episode was a wake-up call for Ringo and Barbara. In October 1988, they both checked into a rehab facility in Tucson, Arizona, determined to confront their demons together. It was a turning point for Ringo, who realized that he could no longer continue down the path he was on. He knew he had to reclaim his life, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. The road to recovery wasn't easy. Ringo had tried to play sober before, but it felt impossible. He once said, "I don't know how you do anything if you're not drunk." But as he began to sober up, he found a new sense of purpose forming. Ringo Starr's all-star band, formed in 1989, and his decision to go on tour became a crucial part of his recovery. The tour gave him a reason to stay sober and allowed him to reconnect with his passion for music in a healthy way. Ringo's struggle with addiction was deeply intertwined with the trauma of losing his close friend and bandmate John Lennon. When John was murdered in December 1980, Ringo was in the Bahamas. The news of John's death hit him like a tidal wave. He immediately flew to New York to be with John's widow, Yoko Ono, and their son, Sean. Ringo spent time comforting Sean, trying to shield the young boy from the overwhelming grief that had engulfed them all. Ringo's personal life continued to be marked by tragedy. His first wife, Maureen Cox, whom he married in 1965, passed away in 1994 after a battle with leukemia. Despite their divorce in 1975, Ringo remained close to Maureen, and he was by her side when she died, holding on to the bond they had shared through the tumultuous years of Beatlemania and beyond. Adding to his burdens, Ringo faced another heart-wrenching challenge when his daughter, Lee Starkey, was diagnosed with a brain tumor in 1995. Lee underwent surgery and radiation treatment, with Ringo staying by her side throughout her recovery. Although she recovered, the tumor returned in 2001, and she had to endure more treatments, a reminder that the trials in Ringo's life were far from over. As Ringo Starr sat down with Dan Rather for a candid interview, he peeled back the layers of what it was really like to be a member of the Beatles. While the world saw four young men united by their music and fame, the reality was far more complex. "We didn't get along," Ringo admitted bluntly. They were four guys who, like any group of people, had their rows. But no matter how intense the arguments got, the music always brought them back together. Once they stepped into the studio, all the tensions melted away and they gave their best. This unity in the face of personal differences was the secret sauce behind their timeless music. However, as the years went by, the cracks in their relationships began to widen. The Beatles, once a tight-knit group of friends, started to drift apart. They were no longer the young lads from Liverpool. They had grown up, started families, and their priorities began to shift. The effort they once poured into their music started to fade as the demands of their personal lives took precedence. Ringo pointed out that it was Paul McCartney who kept the band going during those later years. Paul's work ethic and drive ensured that they continued to make records, even when John Lennon and Ringo himself might have preferred to take things slower. Ringo reflected on how their roots in Liverpool had kept them grounded, even when fame threatened to overwhelm them. They were all from the same city and had an unspoken agreement to keep each other in check. If one of them started to freak out or act like a big shot, the others would step in, reminding him of where they came from. This bond was crucial, especially when they met other stars like Elvis Presley. Ringo recalled meeting Elvis and feeling sorry for him because, despite being surrounded by people, Elvis was essentially alone. In contrast, Ringo knew he always had his three bandmates by his side. The band's unity was tested, however, during the later years of their career. As the pressures of fame and the weight of their legacy grew, so did the internal conflicts. Ringo admitted that there were times when the music became secondary to the arguments and the personal struggles each of them faced. Despite this, they managed to create some of the most iconic music in history, but the cost was high. As the interview with Rather continued, Ringo's tone shifted to one of deep reflection. He acknowledged that despite the ups and downs, he had been incredibly lucky to be part of something so extraordinary. But there was also a sense of sadness, a recognition of what had been lost along the way. The band that had started with so much promise, bonded by their love of music, had eventually fractured under the weight of their success. The Beatles' breakup in 1970 left Ringo feeling lost, a sentiment he reiterated in the interview. He had spent his entire adult life as part of this world-changing band, and suddenly it was all over. The years that followed were difficult for him, both professionally and personally. He struggled with his identity outside of the Beatles, and it took him a long time to find his footing again. Even now, decades later, the memories of those days are bittersweet for Ringo. He cherishes the music they created and the impact they had on the world, but there's no denying the personal toll it took on him and his bandmates. The heartbreaking news for Ringo Starr wasn't just about the end of the Beatles, it was about the loss of the close-knit group that had once been his world. The band may have given him everything, but it also took away a part of him that he would never fully recover. As he looked back on those days, there was a sense of acceptance, but also a lingering sadness for what could have been.